The Wellness Show, episode 163. Welcome to The Wellness Show, a podcast on health and wealth. I'm your host, Tyson Bannigan, the founder of the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy. Join me as we get the latest insight, tips, and strategies from wellness providers, coaches, and successful, heart-centered entrepreneurs, and much, much more. Welcome to the Wellness Show, and we are back live, and today we're interviewing Michael O'Connor, a part 4 in the series, Astrology, Holism, and Healing. And so we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to start by a brief review of the last 3 sessions, where we're going to just recap the difference between ancient, traditional, and modern astrology. So, Michael, welcome back to the show, and that's your first question.
All right. Yes, thank you, Tyson, and good to be here. Thank you. Right. Yes.
Yes, good to have you back.
Thank you so much. Good to be here on a beautiful day too over here. Yes, the first few series, at each point I was discussing the theme of how astrology has evolved. And when we think of ancient astrology, we're talking about entire groups of people and communities and cultures, etc., gathering in more ritual focus. And that still exists, that ancient type of astrology, but it's not as predominant. Then more what's called traditional astrology became more scientific, and that started way back with the Greeks and was going on in India as well, where the endeavor was to make every effort to understand the science behind prediction and to predict the future and to minimize probability and to know exactly what's going to happen and to render, as certain as one could prediction about what's going to happen. And that is still a form of very valid and active form of astrology in the world, no question. And it's a feature of modern astrology. Modern astrology, and I'm referring specifically to Western astrology, there's different systems still, Mayan, Chinese, Vedic, or Jyotish, East Indian astrology. These generally are more traditional. They're all part of the traditional category. Modern astrology points to Western astrology, which is also called humanistic or psychological astrology. So psychological astrology looks more at possibility and takes a less fated perspective and a more possibility-oriented point of view. And it dovetails well with where things are right now with the emerging metaphysical movement of the law of attraction, and where we recognize that also with our astrology that the symbols, the archetypes that are in the chart have more than one level of interpretation. And so we're really, that awareness began to emerge, especially, probably in the 20th century. So it's not old by any means in that regard. Astrology, traditional astrology, went underground for some centuries after the rise of the scientific revolution, and then rose again with what's called the Western occult tradition revival. And so what happened was traditional astrology came rushing back, but on its heels, what emerged in the meantime was an emergence of psychology and what's called the human potential movement. Those two branches emerged within the context of the scientific revolution. It's interesting. And then so when astrology reemerged in about the late 1800s, late 19th century, it came strongly forward with its traditional position, which was great, but all at the same time, new thinkers were on the stage and presenting a new model. Specifically, the one, and there's more than one, but specifically Dane Rudyard, probably is Roberto Ascioli, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Probably not exactly correct, but there's a few key players, and Dane Rudyard is one of them. So there we are. We're in this time now of modern astrology dovetailing very well with a life coaching platform where we're focused, and or depth psychology counseling. So you have a lot of counseling astrologers, or what's called consulting astrologers, or life coach astrologers, which is what I am. And you can refer to us, what we do, as psycho-spiritual. Like there's a psychological component, and the spiritual component is more, we're conscious and we're evolving. We're making choices. We're using our free will. We're not just living according to some narrow fate. So the predictive aspect is put in check. Although it's there and we still use it, we don't lean on it anymore. That's what a modern astrologer or modern astrology does. But it just so happens that we're in an interesting time because there remain at least as many, if not more, traditional astrologers in the field, and the modern astrology is still the cutting edge, even though it's decades old.
So that's really the difference then, is the difference between a fate and destiny and free will. And that's really why humanistic astrology is a different perspective. You want to just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it puts more, fate, destiny, and free will are those words, fate and destiny. Those words have often been misconstrued or thrown in together. Our fate is our destiny, et cetera, et cetera. Fate is more the probability. Fate, is the probability code built into our life. And probability can be high. I like to use the term high in terms of large. The destiny is more the direction of our why we're here, our life purpose. And our life purpose isn't just to achieve and accomplish, although those are features of it. Even they can be seen as means to the end. What we're meant to do in this respect is evolve. Evolve not as a species, but as a soul. We're evolving as an individual, and that this implies principles of growth, maturity, and it has that component of looking at yourself. And you can engage in various types of spiritual science techniques, meditation, chanting, and you can do those traditional spiritual practices, which are great, but it also brings forward a more modern psychological counseling and or call it self-awareness principle, where you're really endeavoring to see who you are. What are my strengths? What are my challenges? What is my karma? What does constitute the details of my destiny? As why am I here? It's not just to, again, achieve and accomplish. Those are more a part of the process of our life. It's more that they serve an end. So they dovetail into one another, but in the end, these all connect. So we have fate, probability, destiny, direction, and free will comes in and facilitates the process. So we're always engaged in free will. Traditional astrologers have come to, it's like an ongoing debate. Is there fate, is there free will or not? Because the astrology in that predictive sense can be so precise, it can lead one to believe and some astrologers to this day don't even believe in free will because they think it's so written, it's so coded, it's so precisely there. But what I began to understand over the years of practice is that there's levels of interpretation and there's levels of response. It's basically speaking higher roads and lower roads. Basically speaking, we take and what constitutes the higher versus the lower road remains open to some amount of debate, right? It's not a pat conclusion. It becomes less than black and white, and that's important too. That's where modern astrology also is very bent on like a dialogue versus too much monologue. Traditional astrology is very monologue. You go to the astrologer speaks, you listen. And that's got its value and place, just download me on what you see, tell me what's going on. Modern astrology is more process-oriented, and it invites clients to return, not just to get the next 3 months of what's going to happen over the next 3 months, or 6 or 9 or year or 5. It's more, who am I? Why am I here? Let's dig deeper into that aspect of me. Let's go in deeper into it shows that there was issues in my home and family and childhood. Does it show that? Yes, it does. Well, let's explore that. And, so a modern astrologer kind of sits in the position of counselor, psychologist, spiritual guide, ideally knowing when they've reached their limitation and say, for example, say I'm not a practicing psychotherapist, I might say, you need psychotherapy, and I can not go there. I have to leave you here. I can help you understand more of it. I can give you momentum with that, but there you go. So, yeah.
I'm curious, this whole discussion of fate and free will and destiny. When we talk about life purpose, one of the things that's come to my awareness as I know my divine gifts and more about my life purpose is I have choice. And that choice is my free will. So if I didn't know I had a choice, then my propensity would be to do the bottom line, or would be my human mind consciousness, or the propensity of what's in the stars or in my, my natal horoscope would be more predominant. I'd just be sort of on default. But if I know that that's the case, and these situations show up, then I have free will. I have the ability to make a choice. Ascensioning, talking about is really very powerful.
It is. Well, the idea here also there, Tyson, is that free will is a feature of destiny, is the phrase I like to use. So we understand now free will isn't just our privilege, it's not just our right, it's our responsibility. So when we see it, our responsibility to ourselves, to our destiny, but really also to society, to the people in our lives and society. And nobody's perfect, and nobody's expecting, what is perfection anyway, but we, that theme of, yes, making responsible use of your free will kind of leads you away from endless excuses, or it leads you away from getting stuck in the blind spot, shall we say. Like, that's just who I am. Oh, that's just the way it is. Now, there's some truth to that. We have our temperament, we have our, our natural, our nature, our proclivities, but then we have what's called our character. And this is where we get the notion of, let's say, character building. We can build our character, right? So as we build character, we increase our leverage on our frailties. We become more integral. We're not just born integral. We can become integral, or we can lose integrity. I think it's rather human of us to be, integral in some moments and not integral in the next, even. Like we're a champ here, but then we're failing there. We're a great leader with a great mind and a great something or whatever, and you're just a champ, and then you turn around and abuse the janitor. You move in and out of integrities quickly. Right. So these are just kinds of ways of describing that it's not pat, who we are, and that we have choices, and it's our responsibility, and the rewards and or the suffering is our own, but also that of others. And so it brings about, basically speaking, a form of spiritual, psychological maturity.
So I have a question around humanistic astrology. Is like a spiritual astrology like a subset of humanistic astrology, or just the term humanistic astrology subsumes the concept of one is going to be doing the psycho-spiritual discovery as part of it?
Humanistic astrology is, basically speaking, person-centered. That's what we also mean by, let's say, modern astrology. Yeah, traditional astrology is event-oriented. What will happen? It's not interested in who you are. It's in what will happen and when, and it wants to bring the probability forward in a really strong way. And once again, that's a really fine art And it can be very valuable to know that probability, as long as we don't get caught
Right.
in that certainty. So we want to keep room for that possibility, right? So the humanistic astrology is just that. It's person-centered, and as soon as you bring the person forward, we get into themes like, know thyself, right? We get into that.
But you're going one step further. You're really dealing a deeper aspect of it. It's not just human-centered; it's spiritually centered as well. So it's like you have even a narrower focus, or on how you are approaching humanistic astrology.
That's a good point. The way I would describe it is this: when we get really close to a human being, we realize that we're a spiritual being having a human experience. So that,
right,
yeah, that reality, I'll call that fact, comes forward very quickly and strongly right there, that we are spiritual beings having human experiences. And we're at this threshold collectively, I'll add very quickly, where because of the scientific paradigm, which is very materialistic at worst, even though it's given us a lot, especially in terms of technology, like science is in its most positive aspect, contributing to the betterment of life in the more material technological sense. But when science takes a position of philosopher, it tries to render truth, it should bow out. It should bow out in the respect that unless the paradigm of science is willing and able to bend and flex, which it is doing, but the point is that we have science and we have, let's say, philosophy, but modern science, quantum physics, string theory, chaos theory, neuroscience are bending in such a way as that they're becoming psychological and spiritual. They can't remain empirical anymore. But there's a large mainstream of people who deem themselves staunch scientists, but they are operating in an empirical mindset and under the assumption that their perspectives are objective. This right. Assumption of objectivity is a massive problem. So the idea basically is that modern science is becoming increasingly more mystical, and that mysticism is leading it back to a more, call it, philosophical, spiritual, psychological, those three, mystical, those four, perspective. So it's rather exciting, and modern astrology, by the way, sits right in there. It's like right in there with them, because you see
it's interesting. Is that?
Sorry,
I was going to say that's perfect. That's a perfect segue into the whole idea that you want to talk about around circumstance synchronicity. For example, synchronicity does not. How do you explain that with a scientific or rational mind? Where it's cause and effect, it doesn't really fit. So as we begin to have this collision or this collective of spirituality and science coming together, then so maybe you could talk a bit about circumstances, coincidence, and synchronicity.
Yeah, there is, when we think of coincidence, I always call that the back door. That events coincide is a better way of approaching that word, that coined term, which at worst is like a little it's a little escape route. It's like the back door. That's just a coincidence, which means I haven't really thought about it much. I can't connect the dots. I'm not thinking beyond a certain level of perception. I don't see the bigger picture. That's what they're saying, in my opinion. And it's a very linear model. Now, when we think of circumstance, even this is where modern astrology comes forward again, and it says we don't assume what the circumstances are. We shouldn't assume that we know. Like, for example, there's many types of people living in one city, and that one city, although it has a general collective thing going on, there's many things going on there. There's different class levels, there's different circles, social circles, there's different, financial levels, etc. There's different levels of reality going on. So while the astrology can kind of peer through that, it has this ability to, like an X-ray machine, see through those circumstantial realities. That does not mean that they should be dismissed. They are the outer fabric, shall we say, the setting of one's life. And when we think holistically, we bring that in. You know, what are this, like, you know, you can have two people born the same day, same moment, same everything, astrologically, but they're obviously from different set of parents with a different set family. And some people will throw, oh, that, therefore astrology doesn't work. Well, that's a nice try. No, it's just showing that it's a model that's not meant to be understood as absolute, but it just simply has a power. But that power now is based on a different paradigm. The metaphysical paradigm of astrology represents basically a conscious universe that is multidimensional, a multidimensional universe. We're not talking about parallel. Yes, we're talking about parallel universes, but we're not talking about repeats of the same thing. Universe after universe is a repeat, like a hall of mirrors. No, we're talking about each level or dimensional level kind of is objective in its own right. It's like different radio stations, each, although they're just a bandwidth away, etc., are objective unto themselves. There's a certain reality to them all on their own. So basically speaking, the circumstance is taken into account, and it's a respectful and reasonable and realistic perspective on who the person is and what their larger reality is. And this is where the astrologer, for example, is now listening, not talking. How's it going? What's going on there? Who, you know, we can try and make those predictions, but why? Why not just let the person say, hey, this is what's going on, you know, we're getting along, we're not getting along, or whatever, or I'm employed or I'm not. Now, the chart can show that probability, but it just brings the conversation into, well, the session to a conversation. Now, the synchronicity, okay, so we have circumstance, coincidence. Once again, we just want to understand that events coincide, but the assumption is that they're random. That's the issue with coincidence at worst. That events do coincide, that in life, oh, there's these pleasantries called, oh, what a coincidence, we bumped into each other we're shopping on the same day. And I was just thinking of you, kind of thing. Well, yeah, is it just random and arbitrary, or is there something else going on? And we'll leave that one alone for now. But synchronicity takes that meaningfulness of events and points it to a larger perspective on reality. And that level of reality shows multidimensionality. And in that dimensionality, in the higher reaches, we get what in the religious sense is called the plan. We get that there's a rhyme and reason to things. There's it's not linear and fixed and just set and pat, but it is probable, and that's where the free will comes in. And a nice way of describing synchronicity is that life is a symphony of synchronicities. It shows, basically speaking, because it's not easy to describe synchronicity as a term. Basically, it says we live in a conscious universe that's operating on purpose, and that everything in the universe has its function and role and place and so forth. And it's very interwoven, so intricately, so sublimely intricately and perfectly, despite the fact that on ground zero here, we're kind of experiencing pleasure and pain by our individual and collective choices. We think, well, it was so perfect, why are we suffering? And the answer partially as well is because we're in the school of life. And if there was no pleasure and pain, you wouldn't learn by your mistakes. Which brings in another level, which basically kind of suggests, well, what's the purpose of life? And I would offer it's to learn to be a responsible co-creator. So when I bring that in, I only bring that piece in to make sense of the larger, to give context to this sense of, wow, we live in a conscious, intelligent, purposeful universe, and astrology is able to peer into that. It kind of measure, it can measure it in a personal's and an individual's life, and the life of a city, a state, a country. because every
Mm-hmm.
of those has an astrology chart. But yeah, I'll say that for now.
So how does this all link to health and healing?
Okay, right. You know, the health and healing factor is that, of course, in life, okay, we are multidimensional beings. We have a physical body. In this paradigm, this metaphysical conscious universe paradigm, we have a etheric body, an astral body, and a mental body. These subtle bodies, the auric field, which can be understood as the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is not deeply lodged in the brain. It's not like that. The subconscious mind is more like the internet, or yeah, basically you could call it the internet to the computer, where the computer is like the brain, and you know, processor and RAM and you know so on. The internet is more this larger reality that it exists as a part of. So it's not separate. It's networked. So when we come to an individual person, though, yeah, we have this auric field that has layers. And so we're basically describing the multidimensional self in this regard, of which the universe is made in the same image. We're made in that image. All things in the universe have these levels according to this metaphysical paradigm, which I firmly believe is there. Now, in the journey as a soul incarnate, we are taking on a body and we come into life experiences, and we are going through life in our everyday way, and you know, we invariably are doing everything to be healthy, whether we know it, believe it or not. Now, that doesn't mean we're always doing it successfully, but basically, if we didn't have food, clothing, and shelter, we would die. That would be the antithesis of healthy. So it's healthy is not just a state in the body, it's also a lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, a whole network of who we are, how we're doing it, what we're doing, and how it comes together to say, wow, my life works. I've got food and I've got clothing, I've got shelter, and I have other things. I have dreams, I have hope, I have relationships, I have goals, you know, I have other things. So we get this health theme wants to be understood not merely as a physical state. Okay. What happens, it's a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. We'll leave the word spiritual open to debate as to what people think it is, but spiritual is a sense of peace within, knowing that there's more to me than just a physical body, and by there, you know, and I'm connected to a larger, conscious, intentional, purposeful universe, and basically I'm connected to others. I'm connected to the world. I'm connected to society. I'm connected to my family. This brings forward, not isolated from one another, but brings forward emotion, etc. Now, healing comes forward as necessary to maintain health, and the key word healing is that it's a verb. It's a healing process, not merely something you get done when you go to the doctor for, you know, an appointment. This healing. No, the healing is a process. So basically speaking, in the journey of life, for various factors linked to free will and outer circumstances and inner realities, which we'll generally call them inheritances, whether genetic, whether we call them karmic, whatever we want to call them, genetic and karmic inheritances, past realities coming forward, whether in my lifestyle I'm eating well and or living sensibly, or you know, living in a balanced way. And the key word there is balance. So finally, the healing process is about restoring harmony and flow. We can say harmony, balance, and flow, or equilibrium. What happens is we go out of equilibrium. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it doesn't mean a person's not living well or right. It's just the hazards of life are there. Sometimes they can be actually recognized as valuable lessons. You know how some people you hear, they go through these terrible diseases or accidents and they go, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Why? because I learned so much. Like it just broke my old way of thinking or my old momentums, and I needed that, and I didn't know, etc. We don't want to invite that. We want to, we don't invite pain and suffering, but sometimes, ironically, when people have it, they're grateful. So basically
That brings us to the next set of questions that you wanted to talk about, or was karma, and that's really what you're talking about, is the illness or the sickness or the person saying, hey, I really learned from that without that experience. So karma, choice, and power of the mind come into play in modern astrology. So you're starting to talk about that. And so how does that all come together?
Yeah, they dovetail back into each other. That's right. Karma is a Sanskrit word, East Indian philosophy, etc. But basically it means causes and effects that transcend time and space. That's not the only interpretation, but that's a good one. Causes and effects that transcend time and space. Now, if one is purely in a materialistic paradigm, the notion of karma can't compute. They won't understand that. They might understand genetic inheritance, though. So genetic inheritance is a different kind of phrase, and it's very valid to bring forward. But karma is another level of perception and a different paradigm that comes in and stands beside genetic inheritance. And once again, we can also talk about circumstance. So it's like a tripod. Genetic inheritance, karma, circumstance. Circumstance means they're outer realities that are there that we're a part of, but we didn't cause them, and they're beyond our control. Whether it's a storm or whether it's the economy being up and down or what have you, it's okay. Generally speaking, they're beyond our control, but we're subject to them. Our genetic inheritance, similarly, they're not beyond our control entirely. That's where epigenetics comes for, that whole story and theme of modern genetics, where they say, you know what, the cell and the way we're made is not as strictly coded in a material sense. In other words, our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions, our interpretations can change even our DNA. That's a big debate, but we'll just hold that for a moment. That's epigenetics. Karma, all the while, ironically, is very ancient, and again, it means causes and effects that transcend time and space, which brings forward this idea that we're souls incarnate and that we reincarnate is the idea, and that we carry with us whether there's, by the way, quickly, karma is not an easy thing to define because there's what's called personal karma, family karma, social karma, there's species, there's kind of race karma, there's national karma. So we need to understand that we're part of this larger network of realities. And so basically speaking, karma comes in as this factor of influences that come from an unknown place, basically the past, that are not merely empirically measured in a domino effect sense. But what's the reason we have conviction in it, by the way, this is an important understanding, is because it's measurable. We can see when we talk with somebody, you go to an astrologer, for example, and they're using an archetypal map, a natal chart, which is like basically a natal chart. I'll keep it simple. And they can see through this archetypal code things that they should not know. They're not psychic. They're following a set of rules and principles that the chart is based on. And they can see, it's a clear seeing, a clairvoyant, clear seeing tool. And they can see what they should not be able to see. And so the person's almost like, this is ridiculous. This is like magic. This is like, are you psychic? How do you know this? How do you know anything? How can you see what went on between my mother and father in childhood? And they can. The only reason a lot of people don't want that, to accept that, is because it threatens their paradigm, by the way. So anyway, without getting carried away on that final statement, so karma comes in and it serves to represent that there's this continuum as a soul incarnate who reincarnates, there's this continuum, this notion of picking up where you left off. That it's like going through grades in school. You finish grade 2, you go summer vacation, you come back, you're in grade 3, basically speaking. There's a continuum and a process of, generally speaking, advancement. Admittedly, sometimes we get delayed and we get bogged down, etc. But so there was, in that question, karma, purpose, and what was the other?
Yeah, good point. Karma, purpose, and was karma choice and the power of the mind. Karma, choice, and the power of the mind.
Yes, that's it. See, now this is where, again, modern astrology steps forward. And again, it's important to remember that modern astrology has itself, and I've been wanting to make this clear, ancient roots. So the ancient astrology, the traditional astrology, the modern astrology. When we get it, but modern astrology really brings forward the choice, free will factor. It wants to maximize that sense of possibility, but it's also woven into responsibility, both of which are linked to what's called personal power. Tony Robbins' kind of notion. The notion that, hey, you have choices. What are you going to do about it? And that's really valid and important. That's the human potential movement. Okay, so we have that karma, we have that choice. Now, the power of the mind, it becomes a very important discussion because, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because on one hand, we have in the human potential movement where it's more metaphysical, like law of attraction, you can have and do anything you want, is their mindset. You can just, the sky's the limit. Now, I wouldn't want to put a limit on that, and, etc. However, the astrology comes forward and must gently and strategically, let's say, help person to realize that while you may be able to do anything you want, in the larger order of things in terms of a conscious universe and a sense of destiny and purpose, there's no great value in pursuing those extraneous types of activities or achievements or things, despite all good intentions or the heroic, call it discipline and will. It's like, kudos on you, but guess what? You just got an A in a class that's really not important, and that's where it gets tricky. It's like saying, who's anybody to say what another should value? And the answer is, well, maybe nobody, but the chart does itself suggest what you could call what constitutes fulfillment of destiny. So the key thing here is to say, we have a destiny, and it represents a type of direction which orientation towards achieves fulfillment. Okay. The power of the mind comes forward to say, by our choices, by our free will, by our discipline, which is ancient spiritual science, whether, yoga, Eastern mysticism, meditation, prayer, chanting, breathing, all these techniques are kind of disciplines meant to achieve something. And there's also, there in Eastern Indian tradition, walking on fire or lying on a bed of nails or doing things that are called mind over matter, right? So this is very exciting. It's like what some people might call miracles. It defies all notions of material law. You shouldn't be able to do that, but they do it. They walk over fire. Tony Robbins, for example, is a good example. He still, to this day, as I understand it, leads groups of people to walk over over fire. And it's the point is that it's a bit of a back and forth, that with the power of our mind, we have the possibility to override what can be described as probabilities. And that's really exciting. And it's a celebration of possibility over probability. And it's good to celebrate that to the max. Where the main point I was wanting to make, where it gets out of proportion, in my opinion, is where it becomes sort of superficially focused on you can have and do anything you want. it starts to lose proportion, but that's a kind of a marketing gimmick, you know.
So the next one is creativity, cooperation, and control.
You know, it's a.
I'll just say that again.
Yep.
The next one is creativity, cooperation, and control.
Yeah, you know, as mentioned earlier, the paradigm the philosophy I work with is that we are souls incarnate and we're here to learn to be responsible co-creators. What constitutes responsible is open to some debate. Generally speaking, we take care of ourselves and we, you know, do good for ourselves and others would be called responsible in most respects. We're not causing harm. Do no harm, and ideally make some kind of contribution, etc., would probably come into the play. So we have that sense of co-creation. We're creating our life on every level, whether we're buying groceries, whether we're buying, you know, decorating our house, whether we're you know, doing valuable and interesting projects, whatever we're doing, we not only create things and environments, we actually, and this is an important phrase, we create relationships. You know, I find myself over the years saying to people in relationship struggles, saying, you know, the idea is that we want to create a relationship and not have a relationship. If you have a relationship, it's very possible that your partner is going to, or your mate is going to feel owned. You know, like somehow they're part of your possession, you're part of your domain of control. But if you create relationship, you're engaged in a diplomatic, respectful, cooperative, you know, process of also you're checking in. So that's where the cooperation comes in. You know, we're cooperating with our own self, with circumstance, with others in our life, and people are doing this, of course, all the time, but it becomes very emphasized as a valuable thing. Life, we can say, is fully engaged in what we can call a cooperation. Life is all the various parts, shall we say, of existence are working in a cooperative, you know, co-op. Like the solar system itself is a co-op. It works very nicely and rhythmically, despite various little, you know, wobbles and anomalies. It works very consistently like a wonderful machine. And that's okay. Control comes forward in two ways. The ideals and the merits and the virtues of exercising self-control. Self-control means I see that I'm developing a habit of one sort or another, whatever it may be, and I have the capacity to recognize it, stop it, and not fall into an addiction. An addiction could be gambling, it could be eating, smoking, sex, we could be addicted to criticizing somebody. It can go on and on. You know, addiction is a pattern that becomes entrenched and repeating and consistent. It's okay. So the other side of control, that's called self-control. The other side of control is the tendency to want to control others. So when we say control, the idea there is that self-control leads us to not control others. If we're in a position of management and authority and so forth, well, we're in a position of delegating and engaging with others in a delegating and authoritative manner. Okay, we can say a person at their job is in a controller position. Okay, fair enough. That's their function within that system, and people recognize that. But what we're referring to is sort of this fear-based temptation or inclination to want to make another do what we want, or think the way we think, or operate the way we operate, and we get attached to it. So basically that's it. That's what I mean by when I think of the co-creation as a cooperation, and the control factor comes in a positive sense. It kind of represents a discipline and an awareness, and a negative, it's an intrusion.
So you wanted to then talk about astrology, holism, and healing as we come to the end of this four-part series. You wanted to bring that all together.
Okay, yes, thank you, Tyson. You know, again, astrology as a tool is a remarkable archetypal lens. It's sometimes I call it a mathematical crystal ball. Some people say, oh, we laugh at the notion of a crystal ball, and okay, psychics have used those traditionally to get sort of into a mindset, I think, and sort of get into a state of mind where their perception's altered. I think that's what it's really about. But astrology works on a much more linear, scientific set of rules and principles that is teachable and repeatable and demonstrable. So we have this amazing tool that can see into people, can see into who they are, how they are, why they are, and not in an absolute sense, because we're not seeing their genetics, we're not seeing all their circumstances. We are seeing, though, probabilities of synchronistic expression. We can see the probabilities of how they are and when certain things have occurred or when they stand to occur, like turning points. As I said, with modern astrology, we don't want to try and predict what will happen. We want to make it clear that there's indications of certain things are destined to occur at certain times and so on. They stand to influence certain parts of your life, but what are you going to do about it is the important part of the modern astrology dialogue. Not just this is what's going to happen, good luck. That's the traditional at worst. It's like, oh, it's going to happen, you're going to die when you're 42, that's it, goodbye. Which is devastating and it makes people afraid. But when they realize it's more co-creative and possibility-based, and there's more than one level of interpretation, and we can engage our free will to engage the power of the mind, we realize, and so on, and disciplines, and you can break patterns and so forth, then we enter into this game of possibility. So the astrology has this kind of, call it, for lack of, in the broadest sense, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritual, like a diagnostic tool. This ability to see into who a person is and even get insight into what's going on and when turning points are coming and so forth, and it provides insight into meaning, etc. Okay, so this is really very exciting. When we get into the healing of it, it inspires and guides a process of flow, of harmony, balance, and flow, which is what healing is about. Where we're blocked, stunted, limited, restricted, restrained, imprisoned, whatever, that's where illness occurs. Everything in the universe is moving, and movement means change. So we realize there that in order for there to be health, there must be flow, harmony, health, balance, and those words, of course, come forward and say, well, what does that mean to you, and how are you going to do it? The holism here brings forward that two things. Well, basically, it's the paradigm of the multidimensional universe. It brings forward that we are more than physical. The mental and emotional parts of us can be seen as layers of our being, not just in our head. They're layers of our consciousness, and they also connect to what would be called the spiritual. The spiritual brings in that deeper sense of that there's a rhyme and reason to it all, that there's a source, shall we say, a God, a power, an intelligence, which operates with rhyme, reason, and law, and there's things that have their order, etc. It's not just random chaos. It's clearly, evidently not that. So when we understand that we are multidimensional, living in a multidimensional universe, even though all those dimensions aren't so easily measured empirically, that's the key thing. The science says, according to our paradigm, They don't exist because we can't measure them. And the answer is, well, that's the limitation of your paradigm. It's just simply that.
Mhm.
Because there's other evidences, but the science then takes a position in a very dogmatic way that then that's nonsense. Because this science is like the paragon of truth. It's like, no, actually, no, it's not. It's good try. It's not to say it's not great, but it's just not the end. There's only when science kind of stands alongside its brethren of whether it's philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and all other fields of human endeavor and sees itself as among equals, will it open its mind. But it sees it itself as the supreme, the smart one, the only one that knows anything. Everybody else is an idiot, unfortunately. So the backing up the holism is it's only a modern term explaining an ancient knowing, and this knowing has been described as the perennial philosophy, as metaphysics, as the deeper reaches of philosophy, as depth psychology. These are features of it, as mysticism, science in the quantum sense, where it goes beyond the material and sees into at least the notion that there must be at least something behind all of this sublime intricacy. So when we say that, some people might interpret it as religious, which it could be described as, but it becomes spiritual. But when we bring in the word holism, basically speaking, it becomes what's called spiritual science, or the science of spirituality.
Yeah, and this brings us to that last point that you wanted to talk about, which is really that it brings you to process and purpose and outcome, and that there's a reason of why we are where we are and why it's unfolding. And then last but not least, after that, how do people get hold of you to learn this about themselves? Because this really helps them know about their purpose, their life purpose, right? And the process that they can use to be able to have some influence over their own outcome.
Yes,
so if you could talk a little.
Okay, first of all, to contact me, the most basic way is to go to my website, sunstarastrology.com, all one word, lowercase, sunstarastrology.com. Thank you for that. And there you can read about readings, book an appointment. There's a form you can fill out. It becomes helpful in terms of knowing what you need and questions you can ask. It supports you there, etc. Now, just that final question of purpose, process, and the purpose and the process is that an outcome. Basically speaking, in life, by and large, it's all a continuum, a process. Like the saying, life goes on with or without you. It's always ongoing, ongoing, ongoing. It's always in a process of change and evolving and so on, right? So that's what I generally refer to process as the spirit's focus. When I say the spirit, meaning the eternal process is one way of saying it. Outcome is what we, as on the ego personality level, are focused on. And it's really nothing wrong with that. It's good. Like say, for example, we're playing hockey. Well, there's two levels of the process, of the outcome that we're after. Basically, we want the puck in the net, and we want to win the game. And then we want to win the cup. So that goal, that outcome, that achievement is very compelling, and it's really exciting. That's what makes life so exciting on the high side. But even if we win the cup with all of those processes in place, all of those outcomes achieved, it's still, there's the next season and the next season, and then there's the next generation of hockey players. So the process continues. The purpose of it all, this is an important theme to end on here, is that it does basically have purpose. It's not that we're just born as a species and we're in this certain time and space, in history, and there's certain, rules of the game and realities. Then we engage, and hopefully we do well, and we are able to get our needs met and our perks and our, satisfaction and fulfillment. But then it's over and goodbye. That was just fun. And it means nothing. That kind of thinking is what I call flat Earth consciousness. It's technically, I think, referred to as materialism, but also nihilism. There's no value, there's no purpose, it doesn't mean anything, so who gives a crap? It turns into a very shallow and sad perspective, I think. So the main point simply is that just as we see in nature all over the place, everything functions according to a rhyme and a reason, and it has an intrinsic purpose. The same is true of our lives. So the balancing act between process and outcome is that they're basically two ends of the pendulum, two sides of the same coin. They're both valuable, process and outcome. But in the end, if you had to give 51 to the 49 over the other, process would take it. Just like if you're a hockey player and you win the cup, the Stanley Cup, let's say, there's another season coming, and you may or may not be on the team. The process goes on, they change the flow, the dynamic. Now, when we bring that into a spiritual context and we really meditate upon that, we begin to realize that we, as having our consciousness, our life, all of the things we value and are and do, etc., these become recognized as more than anything a means to an end. Our life, we can look at our life as an end in itself, and there's a lot of value in being here now and so on. Really embrace the moment and be grateful or be present or whatever that might mean. But when we include the notion of that these experiences are a part of a larger purpose, a larger plan, a larger sense of evolving as an individual soul and collectively, we begin to realize, yes, there's this deeper purpose at play, and that puts our everyday focus of outcomes into a perspective, a nice context. They now have a deeper meaning purely on the basis that we realize that I'm not a material being wondering if I do or don't have a soul or if there's anything more. We become awakened. We become aware that, oh my God, I am a spiritual being having this human experience. And astrology, in the most wonderful way, and this is why I'm so passionate about astrology, is that it celebrates that very strongly, not just in an ethical way, not merely in an emotional way or inspirational. It does it in such a manner as to demonstrate it. It shows, by very virtue of the fact that it works, it reveals that there is this deeper purpose, and that's what makes it so beautiful, and that's where it becomes, well, spiritual.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. That was a wonderful journey that we've been able to have together through this four-part series. And for those that would like to have a session with you and become awakened, full body enlightenment, why not? This lifetime, why choose another one? So it's really, really exciting to have you on the show. And I think we're going to have you back if there's interest in having you back on the show to answer questions for people that are listening to the show. So we'll see if we can schedule that. And I know you wanted to say something else, so go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, yes, the theme of, thank you, on a final note, the theme of awakening and enlightenment is, I like to refer to enlightenment as a dimmer switch, and it's in our own room. So we each have our own subjective experiences, what we might call awakening and/or enlightenment. And so I just wanted to qualify that it's not some thing out there that everybody's seeking and wanting to achieve as some, absolute objective. It's more a process of becoming more enlightened about who you are, why you're here, what constitutes your challenges. Yes, you said it well, and I just wanted to elaborate. And by virtue of that awareness, it increases your sense of personal power. It makes you more understanding of yourself. It gives you a greater sense of responsibility to engage in your life in a conscious, co-creative, cooperative way. So that's a nice way of dovetailing some of those terms we use and address today to make sense of understanding how this all lends to us engaging consciously to co-create not just our lives and our fulfilling our responsibilities and so forth, but also in a very whole sense of not just maintaining, but perpetuating a whole sense of health. We become physically healthier, and we're not talking necessarily about Olympian. We become emotionally more flexible, more animated, shall we say, more passionate to be alive, less attached to outer material realities, even possibly. Mentally, we become liberated from, kind of a black and white perspective. Spiritually, we can feel more connected to things, nature, others, ourselves. So that's where, just to elaborate on those final points. So once again, Tyson, thank you so much. You've been a great interviewer and host, so I very much appreciate it, and look forward to coming back and having some live shows where we can have people call in and we can give some demos.
Absolutely. So bye for now, and we'll be in touch for the next show of question and answers. So this is Tyson Bannigan signing off on the Wellness Show, and thank you, Michael, for this series. It's been lots of. Until next time, bye for now.
Okay, thank you, Tyson. Bye for now, everybody.
For quality online wellness products, courses, and services, visit our sponsors, thewellnessstore.ca and the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy located at thewellnessacademy.ca. To stay in touch, visit us at thewellnessshow.ca. And until next time, be healthy, wealthy, and wise.